Hey, today's guest is my good friend Jason Grechanik. Jason returns to the program after some time, not sure how long, but he was on episode 78 called Plant Medicines and Personal Responsibility with Ayahuasca Facilitator and Tabacero Jason Grechanik. And man, I'm so glad to catch up with Jason. You know, we kind of stay in touch and we'll chat on Facebook Messenger and things like that, but man, it's really good to dive into a deep conversation with someone, especially someone like Jason. You know, Jason, I first met down at the Temple of the Way of Light, where he works there as an ayahuasca facilitator. And he's been there since 2012, working with plant medicines and, learning from indigenous Shipibo healers and training and apprenticing and becoming a tabacero, working with the master plant tobacco. And you can learn all about that too on the podcast that we did. So if you want to listen to that one first, go back to episode 78, you listen to that one, then you come back and listen to this one. But maybe you could listen to this one first and then that one. One thing to keep in mind, just up top, in case you're one of those skip ahead people, which I don't blame you, the podcast, Jason was recording from the temple grounds in the Peruvian Amazon, deep in the heart of the jungle. And the internet connection was a little bit, at times. So sometimes you'll hear a little choppiness, a little static, a little, drop off. I edited it without driving myself crazy. I gave it, some kind of basic edits. But it gets better towards the end, but it's actually not a big interference really. There's just a couple instances, I'd say maybe five or six instances where there's a little bit of a static cutout, and it happens for like 5 seconds. So, it just kind of slows down where you can, and then it picks right back up. So, it is what it is. Supposedly we could send a man to the moon in 1969, walk on the surface of the moon and transmit the the television video signal back to the earth for everyone to watch on their TVs. But for some strange reason, we can't get a solid, decent internet connection from Denver, Colorado to the jungle outside of Iquitos, Peru. But hey, I'm not an expert. I'm not a scientist, so whatever. Anyway, the podcast is great. Jason is awesome. I love talking to Jason. And Jason just started his own podcast. I'm super psyched about it. I love when people start podcasts, especially somebody like Jason. I mean, if anybody should have a podcast, it's this guy for sure. So I'm really, really happy that he did it. It looks amazing. I think it just launched yesterday, so I've got the 3 episodes that he put out downloaded on my phone and gonna get ready to dive into that. It's called The Universe Within. And that's such a Jason title because Jason is really all about, all of his teachings, all of his practices, the way that he lives his life, is all about this, the universe within, the universe inside of ourselves, that we have to, first go within if we want to live decently and properly in the outer life that we experience, to really contribute to that, to be that, to walk that, to create that. Jason's journey has led him, seeking and searching all around the world. And as I mentioned, he came down to work at the Temple of the Way of Light in 2012, working with ayahuasca and apprenticing and doing diets and fasting. And, he has now, I don't want to say he's now attained the rank of master, but he has, in a certain sense, become an authority now after his searching and his seeking and his studying. And now as a tabacero, he is administering diets, tobacco diets, plant diets, to share in the traditions in which he has learned that has taught him so much. So he's been living and learning and working, for like, again, I would say his whole life, right? But most specifically in the jungle for the last 7 years, and down at the Temple of the Way of Light. And he, was down there during when this whole pandemic happened in Peru. Was one of the first countries to go on lockdown. I had another friend that lived in Lima that was talking about how aggressive the lockdowns were and how restrictive things became there. And good friend Sophia Rockland, who was down there as well, had to kind of get out as quick as possible because things were getting really hairy. And Jason remained on the temple grounds along with some other people. So when I caught up with him, when we had a conversation about a couple weeks ago, he was kind of telling me a little bit about what that's like. So you'll hear that, and then we kind of talk more about just the sort of the message that he carries within him, the way that he lives his life, and the sort of mission and vision that has led to create the podcast. I really look at the podcast of just an extension of ourselves in this, curious nature to learn and to share what we've learned, and to have an opportunity to communicate the messages that we feel are most important for others to get a little bit of a peek inside the windows to within themselves, which Jason does so well. And you'll know that from the thousands of guests that have gone down to the temple who have worked with him in ceremony, and that he's helped guide through those experiences. So to find out more, you can go to Jason Grechanik, GRECHANIK.com, and subscribe to his podcast. Give it a listen. If you like what I talk about on this show, you're going to love Jason's podcast. I mean, he is reporting from the front lines of the Amazon rainforest, in the jungle, working with ayahuasca, working with plants, working with plant medicines, tobacco, and has so much knowledge from working with all of these things from his experience and learning. And so I think that and guiding and facilitating these journeys for others, that it's going to be a great podcast. I mean, I'm excited to listen to it. So check that out, and The Universe Within. All the links are down there in the wherever you listen to podcasts, where they have like the show description, notes, and stuff. You could see website, podcast, and social media, and all that kind of stuff to connect and get in touch with him and listen to his stuff. So quick plugs, business stuff to get out of the way. Go to hempbombs.com. Just order something so I can get my damn money from them. Just try it out, okay? It's Mike 15. You get 15% off. What do you have to lose? Try it. If you don't like it, whatever, return it. And then I get a little bit of a cut. I mean, it's CBD. They ship everywhere. Just give them a try. Go check out their website. Google it. See what people are saying. Don't listen to me. But put in the code Mike15. You get 15% off. How's that for an ad read, huh? How about that? I'm sure they're real happy with me. Okay, well, anyway, serious one. Student loan tutor, Zach Geist, also host of the Zeitgeist podcast. Zach Geist, studentloantutor.com. He has helped me tremendously. Him and his team have helped me tremendously. Derek, Michael, and Zach, and all the great people over at Student Loan Tutor. Go to studentloantutor.com. Get in touch with them. See if they can help you with your student loan. See if they can help you out. And if they can't, first mention you heard about it through Mike Mikeadelic. And if you have loans, if you have debt, just call them. Just get in touch with them. They're willing to talk with you and see if they can help you in your situation. They've helped me tremendously, more than anybody else I thought ever could. Zach is a wizard. His team is filled with magicians, and they know what they're doing, and they are helping liberate us from the shackles that imprison us in the debt system, and especially the student loan, the evil student loan system. So studentloantutor.com, go there, check them out, get in touch with them, say Mike Brancatelli sent you, Mikeadelic, and that's about it, really. You know what to do if you love the show. Tell people about it, share it, post about it. I love when you guys send me messages. I love when you guys leave 5-star ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. It makes me feel really good. Makes other people see that the show is worthy and something to check out, something valuable here. Also helps the algorithm boost us up further in the rankings, so the show's more visible and more accessible to people. If you like the messages that I'm talking about, the kind of guests that I have on the show, like Jason, and the messages that he's putting forward and his philosophy and his vision, let's increase the chances that this gets as much visibility as possible. Leave a 5-star rating and review, and go do that, and tell people about it. If you post on social media, tag me. I always repost and share and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to become a patron, you get bonuses, bonus episodes, all kinds of other things, and Discord the Discord server that we chat in, called the Mikeadelic Inner Sanctum, comes with a $5 patron membership. But you can donate if you just love the show. If you just want to show your support, you can donate, $1, $2, $3 Federal Reserve fiat notes, whatever you want. And a little bit goes a long way. Every little bit counts. I really love and appreciate everybody that takes the time to do those things to support just individual sole proprietor, kind of creators like myself out there that are just trying to create things that aren't necessarily heard on a lot of other places and aren't necessarily allowed to be heard in a lot of other places, that have to go through the sort of mechanisms of control and approval and editing before they get polished and shined and put out. And this podcast has always been pretty raw, and I try and keep it real and have guests that keep it real on the show as well. And it's interesting. I love that keep it real, because it sounds like very like a 90s thing, but I'm actually using it because I heard Sharon Salzberg talk about, like what meditation was all about. And she's like, well, it's just about getting real, sitting down and getting real. I just like that a lot. So anyway, without further ado, my good friend Jason Grechanik returns to the podcast. We have a great conversation. As I said, there's like minor little glitches here and there. You'll get through it. The content is phenomenal, so it'll be fine. He was coming in from the Amazon jungle, so you could, obviously you can imagine that the internet is not as stable down there, and I know for a fact it's not, having been there. So it was amazing that we got the conversation out that we got. So with that in mind, know that is, know that I'm giving you guys the notice of this, and I did my best to put it out there. But I know that you're going to say it's not that big of a deal, and that you enjoyed the hell of it anyway, because it's a great conversation. Yeah, let's get into it. Let's get into this great conversation that I keep talking about. My good friend Jason Grechanik, and go check out his podcast, The Universe Within. All the links below in the description. Let's get into it right now.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open to us the possibility that everything we know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Or is it perception?
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity. The opportunity.
How you been, man?
In general, I've been pretty good. The whole quarantine thing here has been a bit difficult, but I'm still alive, so I guess I can't complain.
Yeah, what has that been like? Have you just been limited to being on temple grounds in the jungle?
Yeah, man, it's a long story. We essentially went into lockdown, I think March 16th. And it was originally for 2 weeks, got extended another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, I think another 2 weeks, I think a fourth 2 weeks, then it got extended 1 month after that, then it got extended another month after that. And now we're on our final, well, who knows, but another 1 month extension. But at least with this extension, things are beginning to slowly open up. So it does seem like it's coming to an end, but it's been quite a journey. Especially being here in the jungle, because we rely on food being brought in, carried in. So it's been a challenge. It's been a real learning process on a lot of levels, but knock on wood, we've managed to do it. So we're down actually to the final three people here now.
It's like Survivor.
It is, yeah. I was a little concerned it might turn into Lord of the Flies, but I think we've dodged that bullet.
Nice. That's good to hear. Cool.
Yeah.
So how have you been passing the time? What have you been doing? What have you been up to?
I mean, I thought I would have a lot more time because I haven't been working these last 3 or 4 months. But I mean, honestly, just the day-to-day routines take up a lot of time. Living here in the jungle, it's like we don't have running water, so all of our water has to be carried in. We don't have running toilets, so that the compost buckets need to be changed.
And you're doing all that.
Yeah, we're doing all that, cooking, organizing the food coming in, maintenance, cleaning. I mean, it's essentially, I would imagine, like many people know who live off the land, who have a farm, it's never really a boring day. I mean, there's always things to be done. So essentially most of the days are just filled with basic maintenance of life. It has gotten better as we've gotten into more of a routine of doing that. But yeah, really, it's just doing these really basic things. And, there's a little bit of time for reading or for going on walks, but it's pretty much just kind of like having land and living off the land. So,
yeah. What kind of things did you learn from this experience?
Boy, a lot. I mean, it's a continuous learning process. I mean, even this work we do here, working with plants, a lot of that work, it's been testing a lot of the things I've seen for myself, I found for myself, advice that myself and others give to others, things like patience and trust, and putting these things into practice. It's been a real learning process, a challenge on a lot of levels. Being kind of isolated with some people. I mean, we were actually in quarantine for a long time, so almost in isolation with no contact, and just a lot of things. It's and yeah, then all of the worldwide situation that's arising with the coronavirus and going into that, and I know your podcast, at least when I met you first, it was very much with this idea of kind of this libertarian mindset. And I'd say, if anything, that's just become stronger because, it's really kind of realizing that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but often those intentions have actually massively deleterious consequences when we don't really think those things through. And so it's been, real, just in investigation, a continuing investigation for me of, what is real, what is true, what's important, how to run things, how to really think about these things, not only on a personal level, but on a community level, on a state level, on a worldwide level. So yeah, man, it's been a huge learning process on many different levels. So, yeah,
putting those ideas into practice, avoiding the Lord of the Flies scenarios, practicing the real self-empowered, self-reliant life, which is definitely something that I'm kind of inching more and more towards as I've moved to Denver from New York City after living there pretty much my whole life, and just, spending a lot more time outdoors and in nature. I'm like creeping more and more towards like, well, maybe I'll like buy some land. Maybe I'll live off grid. Like maybe I'll do something like that. I just really, really want to be, I really just don't want to be dependent upon this machine of the state, and yeah, I still hope this podcast speaks through with that core the core ideas of liberty, because I feel like if you don't have that, what do you have? You know, and we're seeing a lot of crazy, scary, but also like hilarious and absurd things that are taking place. And yeah, it's interesting, you know, being in the States, just like witnessing all of this stuff, and you know, the coronavirus, and then the murder of George Floyd, and then the protests and the riots, and now it's the COVID stuff and the cancel culture stuff, and it's just like all this stuff. And then here you are in the jungle, and you're still paying attention, but you're also focusing on the really true, real facts of like living life and surviving.
And I think so many people are, you know, it's you know, for me, it's again, one of these principles of something like you mentioned, this word liberty, you know, which is a very individual thing. Everyone views liberty in a different way. And when we have these sweeping regulations that we say, this is how things are, these are how things should be on a scale that affects everyone, we're all in different situations. And those kind of policies, again, can be very deleterious for people. And, you know, it's one of the books that I often go back to is the Tao Te Ching, which was a really profound book in my development. And, you know, really based on these ideas of, you know, there's certain quotes in there that just always really resonate with me. Like this quote of, let go of the common good, and the good becomes as common as grass. And it's very much, you know, even in this work we do with plants, it's a very similar thing. You know, another quote that really sticks to me is trust in people, leave them alone. And that's very difficult for a lot of us to really envision and to embody, because, you know, so many of us, we have this idea that I need to do good, or even these things that are happening in the US, which I do keep a peripheral view, but, you know, these ideas of like social justice and wanting to be good and to do good. And I think it's an innate quality in human beings. But there's often still a disconnect there, because there's this idea of imposing my idea of good onto someone else. And we all have different ideas. We all have different beliefs, different values in life, different ways of living. And, you know, this idea that there is one way that should be imposed on people, there's something beautiful in that, but there's also something very arrogant in that. And it's, you know, we actually had a podcast a while ago, you know, talking more about plant work and plant medicine. And it's, you know, it's a very common thing, even with this work, is this idea of wanting to control, wanting to impose my idea on how things should be. And it's even with good intentions, it's very much a recipe for disaster, because it's trying to impose this idea of I know. It's the I know mind that wants to control, that wants to control its environment, and with this idea that if I could control everything, if things worked the way I wanted, then the world would be good, then I would be good. And yet, you know, often what this medicine, I think, very much points to is that that's actually the root of all of our suffering. When I try and control that which is beyond my control, it leads to this loop of constantly trying to strive for something that's actually unachievable. And that doesn't mean we don't take action, we don't do things, but it always has to be looked at kind of from a detached point of view, with the willingness to see I may be wrong. There may be things that I actually have no idea about. And yeah, and so that's also something I think that even the COVID thing is really brought up. And I think we're seeing that on so many different levels, is even these policies, which seemingly maybe happen with good intentions, there's so many consequences that we may have no idea about. And then it really depends, how how far down the rabbit hole you're willing to go as to whether these things actually were with good and
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm willing to dive all the way down. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, certainly as we probably talked about before, I mean, anytime I see something where something is being used out of fear to control, to exert force, to take away, from an American point of view, these God-given rights, these birthrights to our lives, to our liberty, to our pursuit of happiness, whatever that is for an individual, that's always a huge red flag for me. And that's been a red flag since the beginning. And that's a very difficult thing, I think, for people to do, because again, even in this work, from what I found from my own experience and through working with so many people now, is that fear is the primordial, what we could say, negative emotion that keeps us separated. And many people think they don't have fear, but if someone said that, I wouldn't believe them. Because also fear manifests in many different qualities. It could be anger, jealousy, resentment, but it's this primordial, archetype of separation of we're coming from, we go to this place of union, of peace, of the Garden of Eden, of unity, God, whatever word resonates for you. But the primordial split is this split into duality. And it's a beautiful thing because that's the manifestation of the universe. That's the observer and the observed, me and you. It's the spark that created life. But paradoxically, in that, there's the primordial fear, which is the me and the other, and what happens when there's no me. And I think in many spiritual traditions, they point to this is the actual root of all of our suffering, this initial split, this initial separation.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, there's always this fear of the unknown. It's the mind, again, trying to control things to create this perceived sense of comfort, of safety, of stability. And yet, in an ultimate sense, everything in an ultimate sense is out of our control. It's, in Zen, they often have this saying of the knife can cut everything, but the knife can never cut itself. And it's very, very much the same with the mind. The mind has the potential to know everything, but the one thing it can never know is itself. And in that the nature of the mind trying to control, trying to understand, we do many things with good intentions, but we don't realize all of the other unintended things. And so because fear is such a powerful emotion, fear for me is the final emotion or state that if one is able to overcome that, one experiences the opposite of that, which is peace or liberation or unity. But, because of that, the fear has such a tremendous power. And I think when we look at any of these things, COVID or the war against another country, or that evolved into the war on terror, and now it's also this idea of a war on a virus. Eckhart Tolle, who I have a lot of respect for, I think he says it very well, which is anytime he hears one of these campaigns that has this either overt war quality or a more subtle quality, like on COVID, he knows it's doomed to fail. Because always with war, it's functioning within that duality of me and someone else, me and an enemy. And as long as I can conquer that enemy, then I'll be okay. But it's just perpetuating the same cycle. And so all of those wars are doomed to fail. But fear is the most powerful tool to begin to create a war. Because when we're afraid, it's much easier for us to begin to give up our liberties, our freedoms, to trust in some higher power, whether that's through a religious organization or a perceived sense of a God who is going to take care of us. And I think very much in this day and age, a government has really become, in a sense, a God, a father figure, someone who will take care of us. I think for so many people, especially something like COVID, which is kind of this new thing, it's a new war, it's this new threat. Even so many people who I saw were very principled in maybe other aspects that align to these ideas, they were also very quick to fall into those traps of fear, to fall into those traps of, well, I get the principle, but this is something different, and therefore I'm willing to give it up. And it's very much, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who had this really beautiful quote, which is, if we give up any freedom for a perceived sense of security, then we actually deserve neither. Because it's actually the freedom, the liberty is the security. That is the very thing that's there to keep us free. And when we lose that, we fall into this trap of essentially enslavement. So that was maybe a bit long of a rant, but
no, it's all welcome, Jason. This is what this podcast is for. I want this. It's good stuff, man. Yeah, the fear is so strong. And, one of the scariest parts of the fear being so strong, and the conditioning and the brainwashing and that sort of thing, is the people turning on each other. When, it's the people, I guess they call them like the Karens now, or, the people who are ratting on each other. You even had the governor of California say, like, if you see people not wearing, turn them in and report them. And this reliance and this really what's birthed out of this fear. And it reminds me of this quote that I love to say all the time by Thomas Jefferson, which is, timid men prefer the calm of despotism to the tempestuous sea of liberty. And it's like, I see that so much in the world, is that we have been led down this sort of road where everything is centralized, everything is concentrated into large organizations and large systems, spreading out from government to everything that government touches, which is a lot. So it keeps us dependent upon these kind of savior figures and things, which keeps us in this kind of state of fear. But I guess my question is, you're a well-read person, and you're someone that, I was looking at your blog, and you were posting about the Lakota and power and Black Elk and things like that. And it's like, it seems that there are traditions that we can learn from that have a different relationship to power and have a different relationship to what it means to really live in the world. So like, what, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because it just seems like we've been sort of stuck in this repetitive nature of being subservient and dependent and fearful for so long. But possibly maybe there's other ways that we can begin to learn from.
Absolutely. I finished a book recently on Crazy Horse and also Black Elk. Black Elk Speaks was also a really formative book I had read when I was young. And these are the people that really stand the test of time. These people like Black Elk, because they were pointing towards the truth. Someone like Crazy Horse, why he had principles and he followed those. Even when his own people turned on him, that's something, if people aren't, and he really fought against the U.S. government for the rights of the Lakota. And it was an interesting time, because there was this new group of people coming in. They were wanting to expand, to have more control. And the guy who wrote this book, I forget his name, but he was a Lakota. And I really respected the way he wrote, because it wasn't from a place of division. It wasn't like the white man was bad and the Lakota were good. This also is the mentality that keeps us divided, that somehow we're the member of a group, or the color of my skin is who I am, or my gender, or my sex, or my religion. And, it's been said, I think, really beautiful, that the greatest minority is the individual, because there's only one of us. There's not even two. So if you can respect the rights of the individual, you respect the rights of literally every single human being. And what I found really beautiful about this author was when the Europeans came.
One second,
and he had this beautiful
cut out
quote,
there for a second.
Actually, maybe I can. Sorry. I was actually going to look for this quote because I have it. I think right here, and
that'd be great.
It's a really, really beautiful quote. Yeah, he says, this is from the book the Journey of Crazy Horse, and he says, "But the soldiers were not the only ones to cause the turmoil of the past 4 months. The finger of blame could be pointed at many Lakota as well. In fact, they were mostly to blame. The white agents, they were kind of the government representatives, and the army officers fanned the flames of jealousy and let little minds that could not think beyond the moment, and little men who yearned for the recognition and power, do the rest. There was no other way to look at it. In the end, the Lakota defeated themselves. They had the whites outnumbered and outmanned and did nothing. The entire garrison could have been overrun by enough determined Lakota fighting men with a good plan, if they truly wanted to return to living the old way, in control of their lands and their lives. Instead, men stepped over each other to betray their own relatives in order to obtain the power handed out by the whites, a power they couldn't get on their own." And, for me, that's super symbolic because, we all have that choice on a day-to-day, a moment-by-moment choice, and as you said, that ability to lead the life we want. Again, there's a tremendous fear in that, and it takes courage and it takes principles to really say, this is what I believe in. And that's what Crazy Horse believed in. He believed in those principles. He believed that, hey, we want this land. We want to live our lifestyle. But many of his own people disagreed with him. And in the end, it was his own people who wanted, the enticing things that the government gave them, the food rations, the titles, the handouts, the money. And in the end, that led to their own demise. And again, it's a very difficult thing because those things are very enticing, but in the end, it led to their own destruction.
Right.
And even here in the Amazon, I think we often have this idea of, many of these indigenous groups had chiefs and there was kind of a hierarchy. And, from what I've seen and from what I've read, that was actually not the case. The chief, the representative, the official, that was something that was, came in, they wanted a representative. Like, who do we talk to? Who represents you as a group? And most of the groups were like, we don't have anyone representing us. Every man is free. Every man is the manifestor of his own destiny. And so they weren't able to negotiate. And it wasn't, for a long time before they realized, oh, okay, we need a representative. But even those early representatives, even by the tribes themselves, they were looked at almost like traitors, because how can you represent the rights or the will of any there's another really good book. It's called Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. And it was this missionary who came down originally just to learn the language. And they had this very unique language. And essentially, after living for a long time with them, he gave up Christianity because he realized these people were actually far happier than his own people. They had everything they needed. He just saw in them a different way of life. And he gives a really, good story and kind of a good example of how they lived, which was someone's house, which was very simple, but it fell down in this storm. And everyone started laughing. It wasn't a big deal. It was just, there goes his house. There weren't riots. There weren't, this is unacceptable. Someone needs to come and fix his house. No, they laughed. It was funny. But what did they do? Every person in that tribe came together, and working together, they built a new house. But there wasn't a chief or a shaman who said, hey, You have to go build that house. If you don't, we're ultimately going to use coercion and force to force you to build that house. Or, you pay taxes, therefore we're going to use the collective tax money to pay that to rebuild that house. No, they all built it because that's what you do as a community. If someone's house falls down, you come together and you rebuild the house. Why? Because it's for the good of the people who are there. It's for their own interest, but also for the interest of the group. Because then if my house falls down and I participated in building someone else's house, then everyone inevitably is going to come and build my house. And it's a much more efficient system. Now, if someone doesn't want to go and build that guy's house, they don't have to. Nobody's going to force them to do it. But if I don't participate in that and then my house falls down, guess what? People probably aren't going to show up. So it's in our self-interest to actually help, to share, to work as a community. But it's not that someone is telling us we have to do that. And it's not coming from a hierarchical place. It's actually coming from a place of my family, of my community, of my land, of a collective land, of a collective idea. So in this way, I think it's a radically different way of thinking. And I think, again, for many people, it's very scary. Again, it comes back to fear. All of these things. Who will look after me? Who will take care of me if I have a problem? And I think also, in a sense, through some of the societies we've built, there isn't inherently that support structure because we have gotten away from it. And so it's very difficult for people to align to a different way of thinking because, again, it's very scary, as they would say in Christianity, to enter the kingdom of heaven. Even the clothes on our body, we have to leave behind. Truly, we have to stand naked in the face of awe of the Creator. And that's the way we're free. But that's very scary. How many people are really willing to do that? And yet, seemingly, that's where ultimate freedom lies. So, I really understand and I sympathize for where a lot of people are coming from. And again, it's not to take away from our ability to change, to protest, to affect change. But what really is important too, which is very fundamental, I think, to any holistic system, is even the system we're working with here with plant medicine. If I'm a plant doctor and I'm only trying to put a patch on the problem, inevitably the problem will rear itself and there's no patch that I'll be able to put that's going to be able to fix it, because the root of the problem will get far too expansive for me to be able to fix it. So the real power in a holistic medicine is actually trying to get to the root of the problem. And often that requires a radically different approach. And it's often a very scary approach because it means actually going into the root of the problem, going into the beliefs, going into the patterns, going into how am I also involved in that? Because it's much easier to put the blame on the problem. I have cancer, it's cancer's fault. I'm depressed, it's because chemicals in my body are out of balance. But what's my relationship to that? How do I take responsibility for that? How do I go into myself and actually get to the root of the problem? And that's it can be a very difficult thing and a very scary thing. So
yeah, definitely.
I think that's where we're at.
Yeah. I really like what you said, leading this off with how these indigenous tribes, a lot of them didn't have chiefs, and it was only the people that were coming in asking for that kind of representation, and then, essentially forming some kind of a hierarchy. But then, those people being like, what are you talking about, man? Like, everyone here just like rules is like the manifestor of their own destiny, rules their own life. Like that, I mean, that is I feel like it's such a lost concept on a lot of people in the world today, because of, like you were talking about with Black Elk and his tribe, and this promise of technology and things are going to get better, where things are going to be more efficient, more connected, and that seems to be very alluring to a lot of people right now. But it creates this sort of disconnection, this separation, this disconnection that we don't really have skin in the game. We like to pay lip service to words like communities and states. They're not those real embedded, enmeshed. I think the word Charles Eisenstein uses is the interbeing. When you actually are participating in the creation of community and a bond with somebody else by, I live in a neighborhood. I don't know most of my neighbors. Like, is this a community? I mean, I don't know, and so we've definitely got a long ways to go. I tend to see what's going on in the world and think, well, I guess, I don't know, catastrophe might wake us up. I don't know. Is that a pessimistic view? But
yeah. I mean, it often does. The work we do here with plants and plant medicine, that's really where the root of a lot of the change happens. It's really going into the darkness. It's going into that complete destruction. But with that, that's a tremendously difficult journey, and it takes a real dedication, a real willingness to go into that. And it doesn't have to be that way as well. It's, for many people, that's a last resort. And, there are ways of changing things without completely destroying something. Because again, if we completely destroy something, we actually don't know what's on the other side. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's far worse. That's something that happened with communism or socialism in many countries, was, again, this idea of we need to completely tear everything down because then it will be better. But unfortunately ended up far worse. So, these things are they're very tricky. And yet that's where, for me, these books like the Tao Te Ching, they're so powerful because they're so simple. And yet in the simplicity, there's very often a resistance to that, because can it be that simple?
Yeah, that's really funny. I definitely see that a lot. I see a lot of people, smart people that I respect, like, well, that's a simplistic view. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and trying to sort of like overcomplicate things. And it's kind of amazing to see. I think we live in a world right now with a tendency to overcomplicate a lot of things for no particular reason other than maybe, I don't know, we're bored and we like the complexity of the drama.
Yeah, and ultimately, as we were talking about earlier, a lot comes from this idea of the world needs to be the way that I want it to be for everyone to be happy. And yet, on a fundamental level, we know that's not true. We know people are different. And so to impose any system onto someone else, that is that colonial mentality of, I know what's best for you. Therefore, even if you don't want it, I'm going to impose it on you because I know what's best. And it's very fascinating. There's a guy, I don't know him well, but he's the head of ICEERS, which is one of the big organizations that helps to promote plant medicine. And he said it very beautifully. He said, when the colonizers came, 400 or 500 years ago, the indigenous people were too indigenous. They needed to be more Western. And today it's the opposite. We look at indigenous people and we say, oh, well, they're too Western. They need to be more indigenous.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But it's the same mentality. It's the mentality that I know, and I'm going to take action to make sure that you align to what I think is right. And that's where that idea of, letting go of the common good, because ultimately I don't know. I can't know. It's literally impossible for me to know you. I mean, even in this language that's often used now, like, I can never know your lived experience. That's true. So why would you try and impose your lived experience on my lived experience? It's It's insanity. But
Yeah.
but again, that's the nature of the human mind. So
It is, isn't it? I mean, it's like we don't, a lot of the times it's so funny to me how we can't really make connections. If something is going on an individual level or an interpersonal level, it's like, yeah, okay, we can kind of get how sort of what you're talking about here, what we're talking about would apply to that situation. Like nobody would ever think of like coming in and determining how a couple should behave and how a couple should, if you have problems with your girlfriend, your partner, or whatever, it's like, okay, we're going to tell you what to do. This is what you're going to do. She's going to do this. You're going to do that. And if you guys don't do it, we're going to kidnap you and throw you in a cage. So you better listen and you better shape up and get right. It's like, no, like clearly if there's a couple that's fighting and arguing, maybe they should just separate and go their separate ways and go somewhere else, and find peace some other way. So, I think about that, and I think I forget if it was Thomas Sowell who said that, or someone was like, the United States, it's like, if people can't agree, it's like, do what a married couple that is fighting would do, get a divorce, and this concept seems to be, I think when you bring it up, a lot of people are like, well, the Civil War and then slavery and all this stuff, we have to be united and unity. And it's this tricky thing, right? Because it's like, in one way, it's like, yeah, I think like a union and a harmony sounds pretty good. But also imposing a union and imposing harmony and mandating it, that's not so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, even something like slavery, it arose again from this fundamental principle of not protecting the right of every individual to his life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There were even these government policies like the 3/5 policy, that a black man was actually only 3/5 of a human being. Therefore, he didn't have the right to own a firearm, to protect himself, to actually take control of his life, to manifest his destiny, to protect himself from the aggressor, whether that was a slave owner or a government who was telling him, no, you have to do this. And so again, that principle is so important, and like libertarianism, for example, it's just that very fundamental principle of non-aggression, of hey, live your life how you want, but you don't have the right to interfere with someone else's ability. Now, obviously, within that, all sorts of things can arise. I want to play my music at 2 a.m. And that's my right. Well, but that also affects your neighbor's right to sleep. So, within that's why none of these things are easy. There's always going to be work that has to be done. But if we can respect those principles, I think we give ourselves the fundamental basis of how to create a society that actually does honor all of that. And I think the U.S. is such a good example. I mean, that's what the U.S. was founded upon, was these people actually fleeing their homes because they didn't have the ability to live their lives how they wanted, because they had governments or they had institutions telling them, you're not allowed to practice your religion. You're not allowed to do this. You can't do this. And so they fled looking to live in a place that allowed them to do that. Now, obviously, fundamentally, which so often happens, is when we see those things for ourselves and we understand the importance of that, but often we're not willing to extend that to someone else. And this is where these things arise from, and the atrocities that have been committed all throughout history, slavery, war, conquering. It comes from that same place. It comes from imposing, again, my way of being onto someone else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you given that fact, that we've seen, and I think it was Ronald Wright in his book Short History of Progress, who said, like, that every empire has risen and fallen. Every empire, it extends itself very far abroad and becomes aggressive, and it becomes, controlling and despotic at home, and collapses usually due to like, inflation and all kinds of other divisiveness and chaos. So it's like, man, those patterns have been repeating. It doesn't seem like anybody really takes notice, except for maybe a few people. But like, yeah, are we just kind of like doomed to repeat this cycle? Like, is there going to be, are people going to wake up and get it? And everyone's, going to be like, wow, we changed the world, man. Like I hear a lot of like this kind of talk. But I also just tend to kind of think that, I don't know, man, like this is the way it is. Like you got to just kind of take care of yourself and the people around you, tend to the part of the garden that you can touch, take care of yourself. Like, I know you're starting a new podcast that I'm really excited about called The Universe Within, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so,
title's still a little undefined, but yeah, I think so.
But the general idea is this entire universe that we have inside of ourselves, and how, it may be cliche to say, and you hear it everywhere you go in spiritual communities, but it really does start within, because as within, so without, and as above, so below, and so forth. And so yeah, it's like, how do you see like the future? Like where do you see the world in like 20 years or something like that? Like I know there's probably a number of potential outcomes, but do you have hope that maybe that things could turn around, in a positive direction?
Well, I think always, if we as humans had no hope, then there would be no reason to live. And it's something that I've seen a lot through this working with plants, and also I think that's why history is so important. Actually, learning from the past. I think there's so many esoteric traditions that point to these things, but the world is never stagnant. And I think, again, a lot of our suffering comes from this idea that if only we got to this place, then everything would be good. And yet that's never the case. And that's never been the case. The universe is always in a state of entropy, of change. It's the fundamental principle of this reality. And again, on a side note, that's one of the really powerful aspects of plant medicine, is it does give us, one could say, access to other states of reality where we are perhaps able to see things in different ways that we're not able to in this reality. But in this reality, one of, if not the most fundamental principle, is this aspect of change. Everything is in a constant state of change. The tree is constantly growing, changing, evolving, and eventually it goes into a state of decay, and then it changes into something else, and something else grows out of that. So also in this work, for anyone who's not familiar with it, but in many of these plant medicine traditions, like with ayahuasca or tobacco or iboga or any of these things, there's always this archetypical battle between the light and the dark, and that if humans don't participate in that, then darkness will arise. And so that's the path of the curandero, or the shaman, is to try and keep these things in balance, to try and feed the light so that it's able to balance out the dark, or even overcome the dark. And in many ancient traditions, they viewed time like that it was in a constant process of change, that we actually live in cycles of epochs. In the Vedas, they talked about yugas, or in the Mayan system, it was the same thing. Like the 2012 thing wasn't the end of the world; it was the end of a cycle, of an epoch. And without going too much into it, but a lot of this was based on these really advanced technologies of things like procession, of these people who were supposedly extremely primitive, and yet they realized that the earth followed three motions. One, it rotated around itself. Two, it rotated around the sun, or the sun and the earth were in rotation amongst themselves. But there was a third, which was this idea called precession. And, essentially every 72 years, through the wobbling of the earth, when we look at the cosmos, it shifts 1 degree. In 72 years is essentially the average span of a human life. So even in one human life, if you were to observe from birth to death, you would only notice a 1 degree change. And yet these people observe that to be a fundamental principle of this earth, of the universe, of the cosmos. And so in that way, if you extrapolate that, 360 degrees being a full rotation, you come up with something like 25,000 years. And that was called the Great Epoch, or the Great Cycle. And then you break that down within, 12 months. We have 12 zodiac symbols, 12 disciples of Jesus. It's a very prominent number. But then you got these cycles of 25,000 divided by 12, essentially 2,000 years. And that every 2,000 years, humanity went through a fairly large shift of consciousness. And, even the Jesus story, and I don't want to go too much into this because it might be triggering for some people, but, essentially Jesus was the age of Pisces. That's why he was often represented by the fish, and he was the transition out of and into this new age of the age of Aquarius. And so essentially, all of these cultures throughout the world were saying the same thing, that the universe is always in a constant state of change. And that means humanity is always in a constant state of change, that we're always evolving, we're shifting, and we're moving towards something. But with that, we also have the ability to die, to crash, to start again from zero, and then re-evolve, potentially re-evolve in an even greater way. But like anything, in order to do that, we have to go into the darkness. We have to burn. And that's also what this plant medicine is pointing towards. It's as we tell any and everyone who comes down to work with these medicines like ayahuasca, this work is not easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it, and everyone would be happy, and the world would be full of unicorns and rainbows, and we'd be dancing on clouds. But it's not. It takes a tremendous courage and a tremendous willpower to be willing to go into the darkness, to go into the destruction, to be swallowed into the void of the universe, to lose the sense of self, the sense of everything we know to be true. That's the archetypical Buddha's journey. That's the archetypical Christ journey, is to dissolve into the infinite. And with that is actually liberation, because everything, all of our fears, all of our anxieties, everything that we project that's wrong in the world, we project it into that fear, into that darkness, into the archetypical bad, the devil, the forces of darkness. And we fight against that, and we fight and we fight. And yet we never actually, in a sense, question what is on the other side of that. And, going back to, for example, how the US was formed, even with this quite beautiful system that was formed based on these ideas of Enlightenment philosophy, that even the people who created that said it's a constant battle. The nature of a government, of anything, is tyranny. The nature of anything is to grow, to expand. And so unless there's a constant checks and balance, unless there's a constant struggle to keep that in balance, eventually that will overcome. And so it's up to every person, every individual, to constantly be aware, to constantly question, to constantly go inside themselves, see what is real, what is true, and then to bring that out into the world. And to bring that out into a world that, again, doesn't feed that same energy, but that actually supports it through, in Buddhist terminology, through right action, through right being, which is not creating more division, but actually feeding the very thing that we want to create. And that's, again, a very difficult thing for humans to do, because often our natural tendency is to fight against something. But as I think so much of us are perhaps beginning to realize, when we fight war with war, it's just war, and it's feeding that same energy. So how do we step outside of that and actually feed it from the very thing that we want? And again, that's very, it's so very difficult for the human to do, because it's so much easier to say, this is bad. That's the thing that's evil.
Right.
But when we do that, we omit ourselves from that process. And for me, the true challenge is actually going inside and seeing, oh, well, what is bad in me? Where is the war inside of me? Where's the anger inside of me? Where's the racism inside of me? Where's the police brutality inside of me? Where's the tyranny inside of me? Where's the desire for power inside of me? And if I can come to terms with that, if I can find a way out, then I'm able to actually share that. And that was also essentially the Buddhist teaching. You know, there is suffering. Suffering is inherent in humanity. And there's a way out, and this is the way. So yeah.
Yeah, and you know, something that I see too is also, I mean, you know, Jason, this is like, you really have to work to be a master of yourself. And so many people just aren't, you know, I didn't necessarily grow up with those principles and values, you know, baked into me. I certainly got some of them from parents and people around me here and there, but I also had to really unlearn and relearn and go into scary, dark, terrifying parts and just keep going in and keep going in. And I'm still doing it. And, you know, but there is these, there's so many traps along the way. Like Cho Young Trungpa writes in his amazing book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism as well. It's like, you know, seeing those parts, as you said in yourself, but then there's also this thing that I've noticed where it's like, a lot of people get addicted to the process of like, well, I got to work on myself, and I got to, you know, it becomes this sort of obsessive thing that is almost like, instead of fighting that war on the outside, which it is probably spilling over as well, there's this intense battle to fix and to change now. It's got to be different now. So there's even this element of that presents itself in a sort of a trap. So it's really, you're really having to, and again, I always think of you when I think of this, it's like, it's neither good nor bad. You know, it's like finding this subtle balance in between all things, which is so complex, you know, because we are so conditioned and primed and trained to see heroes, villains, good, bad, you know, dark, light. And if something is bad within us, to fight it, to eradicate it, you know, to wipe it away. So yeah, it's like, how does one even begin to understand how to have balance? Is that something that comes with time, with trial and error, do you think, like, or just a willingness to kind of pick yourself up and keep going back in there?
You know, like I was saying, I grew up playing sports, and it's something we're seeing in, I think, a lot in American culture too, is this idea of, you know, competition is bad, or, you know, everyone needs an award. And, but again, you know, the idea of that is noble. There's something beautiful in that. But if we go to one extreme, we get away from how nature actually works. You know, things are unequal. It's not that something is inherently better, but things are different. You know, I'm looking outside right now, and every one of these two trees is different. Not a single one is equal. There's a cacao tree there and a cacao tree there, and they're different, even though they're the same tree. And you know, something I think is really valuable about sports is it actually teaches one a lot. It teaches one about real principles. That if I work, if I strive, if I train my body, if I train longer than the guy who's just sitting on his couch and eating, you know, potato chips, I put myself in an advantage, and that's a real thing. And you know, that takes trial and error. And you know, one of the sports that I think is really beautiful is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, martial art, because it's so real and it's so visceral. You know, one can have any idea about what they want, you know, that weight and mass isn't real. That's a great belief to have. You'll find out on day one that that's not true. It's just that simple. You know, I have an idea that strength isn't real. Well, that's great. Put it to the test and you'll find out on day one that that's not real. I have a belief that men and women are the same. That's a great belief, but you put it to the test on day one and you find that that's not real. And again, it's not that one is better than the other. It's just there's differences. There's fundamental differences. And this is the arising of wisdom, because we all have these beliefs. We all have things that we think to be true. But truth has to be actionable. We have to put it into practice, and we have to see, well, what are the results? And through that experience of doing something time and time again, we get closer actually to the truth. And it's not through a process of believing something, it's through a process of actioning something. And through the shedding away of what's not true, we get closer and closer to this idea of what is true. And so, as you said, a lot it's trial and error. It's, and that's also the evolution of human beings. It's, it's, when you think of maybe even something like Star Wars, or we often hear of these ideas like a council of the elders. You never hear of a council of teenagers. And again, it's not that teenagers are inherently less wise. They have a certain wisdom in and of themselves, a certain experience that's super valuable and to be taken into account. But there's something that comes with wisdom, and wisdom is very different from knowledge. Knowledge can be learned anywhere. I can pick up a book and learn facts. I can learn, seemingly, I can learn about anything I want, but wisdom is very different. It's the lived experience of actually going through those things and finding on a really deep level what is true. And that can come from age. It can come through life experience. It's not inherently correlated with age. There are many young people who are very wise through their life experiences. And again, it's often a similar thing. Sometimes the darker our lives are, the more wisdom arises, because we're put in a situation where the stakes are very high. And again, we see it a lot in this work. Often some of the people who have the greatest trauma can have the greatest awakening experiences, because things are so difficult, so heavy, so dark, that there's this sense that, I can no longer live with that. It's too much. I have to let it go. If I don't, I will literally die. And you can see it, maybe unfortunately in war, in very high stress jobs, and in things where the stakes become very high, almost to the level of life and death. But from that, there's a tremendous wisdom. And so I think that's just a huge part of life. It is, as you said, it's a trial and error. It's a doing something. It's a falling up, picking ourselves back up. Again, in sports, that's a very valuable thing, is to lose. Losing is essential, because we learn so much from that. Okay, where was I off? What can be improved? It's the same with this work. We often refer to this work as open heart surgery. And not everyone is equal. I would not want to go to an open heart surgeon who doesn't have a degree, who thinks he knows what he's doing, or who got a degree from,
watch the video on YouTube. Yeah,
watch the video on YouTube. It takes countless years. I mean, years and years of practice. And, what the difference between someone who just starts and someone who's been doing it for years, they may know the same thing, but there's a very different quality. For example, if I'm running a ceremony and, I read in a book that these plant medicines, they're always helping you. You're never going to die. It's always for the best. But it's a very different quality. If I approach someone in ceremony who's having a very difficult time, and I tell them, because I read, everything's going to be fine. You're going to be okay. It's all good. There's a much different resonance, and someone will pick up on that. Someone will feel that. Then if I've been in that situation myself many, many times, And I've worked with people many, many times, and I've seen time and time and time again that things truly are okay. And perhaps I can even see where they are in that journey, that there's a trust in me, again, through experience of, oh, that's where you are. And that's actually really good. Things are actually really okay. And that's not a knowledge. It's a wisdom. And it's not because I'm better than someone else or I'm different. It's just simply doing that over and over again. There's a very deep trust that's built. There's a very deep wisdom of, hey, things are actually good. And that's a different resonance. Someone feels that much, much differently. So, yeah, I guess kind of a long answer, but yeah, a lot of this it's just, that's how life is. It's this constant back and forth, this constant light and dark and good and bad. But where's the center? And that's what, for me, all of these spiritual traditions are pointing towards, finding the center, the middle way, the harmony, the balance. They use so many words, but it's pointing towards the same thing. Union, which is balance, from an Egyptian point of view, weighing your heart on a scale and it has to be as light as a feather. That's a hugely symbolic metaphor. Because, for me, what it's trying to say is, any anger, any resentment, any pain that's in your heart, that weighs on you. And it's going to weigh more than that feather. But to be truly free, it has to be liberated. And the only way to do that is actually to go in and to get to the root of that. Where is that anger coming from? Where is that fear coming from? And as we do that, slowly the heart begins to be as light as a feather. Things begin to come into balance. You mentioned Thomas Sowell. He was a very fascinating guy. He was a Marxist when he started. He went to one end of the spectrum, and through time, he probably went to another extreme. But even as because I actually have a tremendous respect for Thomas Sowell, even as I've seen him get older, even with him, there seems to be a balance. There seems to be an understanding, a deepening of the knowledge. But that just comes from work, and it comes from constantly questioning, what is real, what is true, and that's all of our work. So.
Yeah. And there's an interesting, commonality between us, and that I don't necessarily find in a lot of places, which is the ideas of libertarian philosophy, plant medicine, spirituality, Buddhism, other spiritual traditions. And it's for me, and I suppose the same is for you as well, but I'll let you speak to that. For me, it's like, man, I'm always just keep him open. I'm just open to, I'm interested in knowing, well, if this person has some ideas, I want to know what they think and what their truth is, and investigating that. And I feel that there is it's almost like there's such a shutdown sometimes, within this, the being open to ideas that maybe other people would just tell you, well, that's not the correct idea. So you're like, oh, okay. And I see that as probably, it's probably a shutdown from within, like within oneself, like not even really knowing, my girlfriend Jenna was telling me the other day, like there's, one of her friends, like doesn't even know what she feels. And it's like, how, if you don't know what you feel, like, how could you even know what other people are saying is how could you even know that you could be open or closed to these things? And why would you be closed? Why wouldn't you at least, take a little peek inside and see why this is or isn't, or whatever the nature of that particular idea or philosophy or theory is. So yeah, and I suppose also something that comes along with that is a degree of isolation as well. When you're talking about the story before with the troops and the Lakota is like, and Black Elk, they didn't even, he had to stand alone almost, in this principle. So there's a sort of again, back to this fear. Well, I don't want to be alone. Well, I don't want to be on the wrong side. I don't want to have the wrong opinions. I don't want to have the right, the wrong ideas. And that creates such a sea of confusion. And I think that, I'm interested to get your take on, what I've been saying, but also about where to look to for wisdom, where to look to for wisdom, because I look at the work that you're doing and the work that the other people that are down there are doing, many wonderful people that are engaging in a sort of relationship where there is a teacher, an apprentice, something that has been a tradition for a long time that we've sort of gotten away from, at least in America and maybe other parts of the world. The apprentice, the role of the apprentice, the role of the sort of wise teacher that's going to take you under their wing and guide you along in a process for an extended period of time. So I don't know, there's a question in there somewhere, but just if anything kind of resonated with or if anything, not resonated, but if anything comes to mind about what I've been saying, please, elaborate on that, if you will.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think anything can lead to wisdom. I've since a very young age been interested in a lot of these kind of esoteric practices and religion, spirituality. So that has been a big part of my path for a long time. But also, as I mentioned, something like jujitsu, sport, I've learned a tremendous amount in that. I mean, jujitsu has been a huge teacher for me. I use examples from that all the time. Probably a lot of the people who I work with here are tired of hearing those examples because I use them so much. But it's taught me a tremendous amount. I had this amazing girlfriend for a while, and she really wanted to. I think I was doing a vipassana or something, and she wasn't able to do it. But she wrote to me one time and she said, I don't think I really need that. She said, I have a garden and I think everything I need is right here. And it was just so true. Something like gardening, it can teach us everything. Every principle in life is represented in that garden. If one really looks and observes, one can see everything. And I think that's the case with anything. I mean, if you're a janitor, you can learn everything through that, through how you sweep, how you mop, how you clean, what emotions arise, what beliefs come up with that. It's, anything can be tremendously powerful. Having said that, I think, as you were alluding to, something that we've potentially really lost in a lot of the cultures we've come from is this idea of a ritual, of a very specific time and place that we allocate to going into these very altered states of consciousness. And for many people, that may seem very strange, although I think, especially in this time, we're getting much less hesitant to those ideas. A lot of the work that's being done with psilocybin through very legitimate universities like Johns Hopkins and Harvard and Imperial College. There's a growing abundance of information showing that the real power of these plants. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, with that, I think it is also very important to understand the context in which these have been traditionally used. And it doesn't have to be plants. There's things like vision quests of going out, isolating oneself, fasting. Tremendously powerful too. I mean, we work with those here with plant medicines too. It's usually isolation and fasting and working with plants to amplify that process as well. But I think in so many cultures, this was a huge part of their wisdom, of their understanding, of their bringing balance into their lives, into their families, into their communities, understanding better their place in the universe. And, these altered states of consciousness, if no one has done this work, again, it may sound like a very strange thing, like hippies dancing around. And it was one thing that really kind of off-put me to this work for a long time, because I also had that kind of impression. And while there is something powerful about that, I think, again, a lot of the context was lost. The tradition was lost, which, again, is very, very important, the setting. And so I think traditional cultures all over the world have used these plants, again, to really go in and to see things from a different perspective, which for me is one of the fundamental things which you were talking about, this idea of wisdom. It's fundamental in Buddhism, for example, which is seeing things from the other side. That's actually the definition of wisdom. And it's something these plants have a tremendous ability to do. And, and again, this idea of an altered state of consciousness, it may kind of scare people or put people off, but it's a very natural process. Again, like this idea of entropy, of change, our consciousness is never static. We're never just like this the entire time. It's constantly flowing. It's constantly changing. The state of consciousness I'm in right now is very different as if I was arguing with you, or if I was making love to my partner, or if I was cooking or driving a car or meditating or sleeping. Sleeping is a highly, highly altered state of consciousness. We spend a third of our lives, if we didn't know what sleeping was, we would be terrified of it. Because if you look at someone sleeping, they are essentially dead. Their body is completely unresponsive, and they are somewhere else. They are in another dimension, universe, whatever you want to think. And yet their consciousness is fully aware. It's fully present, and it's not their body. They could be a bird. They could be a child. They could be an old person. It's literally a realm of infinite possibilities. And I think many cultures throughout the world have realized that that's a very profound state. And there's been a reverence for the dream state. And through working with plants, essentially what those plants are doing is inducing that dream state. But it's doing it in a way where we're actually able to participate in it. We're in essence, we have one foot in the dream space, but we also have one foot in this reality. And now, in that way, whatever we learn in that space, we're actually able to integrate that into our lives. And, one of the most common things that I've seen through doing this work, and we touched on it a little bit before, is this idea that all of our suffering comes from the mind that thinks it knows. The mind that labels, I am this, I am that, that person is this, that person is bad. I'm suffering because this person did that to me. I'm suffering because the world is this way. And what very often arises through this initiation experience, through this ritual experience of working with plants, is a state of wisdom, is a state of being able to see things from the other side, being able to see through the eyes of the person that I have a grudge with, through seeing through the other lens, and an understanding, an understanding of where that's coming from. And inevitably, what usually begins to arise with that is a real sense of compassion. That this thing that I've been holding on to, it's not inherently bad. And more than that, it doesn't have to be who I am because it was in the past. But every time I think about that, every time I bring that into the present, I'm feeding that, I'm keeping that alive. I'm flaming the fire to continue to burn with that. But how do we get rid of that? And one could say that maybe the only way, or a very wise way, is to go in and to investigate that, to actually see where the root of that is, and to actually resolve it, to come to peace with it. Because when we resolve it, then it's no longer a part of who I am. And in that way, there is this tremendous wisdom that begins to arise.
Yeah.
This isn't absolute. This was me thinking this into reality. And, we have to be very careful with that, because it's not that the thing didn't happen. It very well may have happened. Most likely it did happen. But as long as I keep feeding that, then that's part of me. And if I can understand where that came from, why that came from, how that happened, and I can resolve that, and I can bring compassion to that and understanding to that, then it's no longer a reality. It happened, but it's no longer in this reality. And in that sense, I'm now free of it. I'm free because I've chosen to let it go. We have these expressions in English, like the baggage that I'm carrying around, or this weight that's on my shoulders, and that's real. We are carrying that around. And it's not that, it's my fault that I'm doing that. That's the human condition. That's what we all do. But through this process of going in and resolving these things, we have the ability to let that go. And so again, there is this very powerful mechanism, which is plant work, which gives us this ability, I think, to really cultivate wisdom. And, for me, the goal of this plant work, it's not inherently to talk to the Lemurians and understand the Akashic records and, shoot thunderbolts out of my hands. That may be important in someone's journey. But as one of the curanderos, one of the doctors that I work with, puts it really well. Her name is Leela, and I'm hoping to have her on my show when I start it fairly soon. She says simply that this work is just to be happy. That's it. It's to be happy. It's to be at peace. And when we're at peace, that comes through wisdom. It comes through bringing things into harmony, into balance, not holding on to the past, not worrying about the future, but just simply being in a state of presence. And there's often two words that I hear when people work with these plants that really, something resonates in me that really shows that person is doing that. And those two words are gratitude and humility. And when someone is in a state of gratitude and humility, they're not holding on to the past. They're not worrying about the future. There's a gratitude for being alive. There's a gratitude for every single thing that's actually happening. And that humility of just being in awe of the state that we're actually in. We're human beings living in this amazingly psychedelic experience of plants bursting out of the ground and birds and insects, and we're seemingly floating on this ball through space in this cosmos that's a grain of sand in a universe that's expanding. In our wildest dream, we couldn't imagine this. So,
Yeah, you only have to be the thing that you're being with the identity that you think you want to be for that period of time, but it's all, you realize that it's just a choice and you can let it go. And I think that's so much liberation comes with that, it's just this, but so many people derive their identity, from that, and that's okay for that period of time. You'll come to a time when you won't, maybe, or maybe you will, or maybe you won't ever come to that time, but it's everybody's own individual process. I mean, it's really amazing when you do realize oh shit, I've been choosing this particular identity for myself, and I don't have to choose that. I can drop that if I want to. So yeah, it's amazing, Jason, really. Yeah, looking forward to your podcast, man. So I maybe talk a little bit about that and what's inspired you to create that, and if you want, if not, but I assume that by the time I put this out, it'll probably be in motion. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that, and then we can kind of wrap things up.
I see some voices who are talking about this work, but often it's voices of maybe people who have come down and who've worked with these plants and really taken and learned amazing things and then extrapolating things from that. But I don't really see any voices of people who are actually doing this on a day-to-day basis, doing it, on the ground, working in it, from the doctors, the healers, the people who facilitate this work, the people who are helping to teach and running these places. So I'm hoping it's really just a platform to give these people voices, to show this work, maybe in a way that a lot of people wouldn't have access to, and maybe it encourages some people to begin to work with these plants, and even more so people who have worked with these plants, just to, in their own integration journey, to be able to listen to something that hopefully helps them to develop and to continue to learn, and to actually hear things from people who are in this, and potentially can share whatever wisdom they've learned. So yeah, that's really the idea behind it.
That's amazing, dude. Yeah, reporting from the front lines. I love it. That's so cool. And I feel like it's just going to be awesome. So definitely check that out. I'll have the links in the show notes and stuff, so people can go and they can find you and they can find it and they can listen. Cause yeah, man, I could listen to you for a long time. And I know a lot of people out there listening probably agree with that as well. So yeah, thanks so much for being on. It was good to reconnect with you, and everybody, till next time. Jason Grechanik, thanks, my man.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the show. You guys know what to do. If you love the show, just like it, share it, spread it, subscribe. Of course, subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Apple Podcasts is the one that helps the most. It's kind of like the Google search for podcasts. So leave a 5-star rating and review on there if you can. Really helps the show. Really helps boost my ego. And no, but if you want to become a supporting listener, supporting member, you can go to patreon.com and donate as little as $1 a month. At $5 a month, you start to become a private Discord member to the Mikeadelic Inner Sanctum and all that other stuff. So thanks for listening again. Check out studentloantutor.com. Tell them Mike Brancatelli, Mikeadelic sent you. And hempbombs.com. Put in the code Mike15 and get 15% off all your CBD needs, wants, desires. Peace.